welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be about my story. I'm 22 years old, and as you heard in my last video, I was just diagnosed with hereditary angioedema. This has been a long journey for me to come to this diagnosis, so if you're curious to hear about the symptoms and what I went through, I suggest grabbing a snack and listen along. I grew up a really sick kid. I had multiple infections. I had strep throat continuously, and I had really bad ear infections as a kid. I can remember waking up and just having blood on my pillow because my ears would have been bleeding through the night. And when I was 11 years old, I had pneumonia so bad that I was in the hospital for 2 weeks on oxygen tanks because so much fluid had filled in my lungs, and they realized I had holes in my eardrums. So that caused a bunch of surgeries on my head. So I grew up in and out of the hospital, in and out of surgeries, and when I started high school, I realized that I was getting sicker than most people. I would wake up in the morning and basically spend an hour being sick. I had really bad cramps all the time, and I just thought that was normal. About halfway through the 11th grade, I woke up one morning and my hand was numb. Basically the entire palm was numb. I realized it was slightly bigger than the other one, so I was like, my hand's swollen. I remember going to my mom and showing her, and she's like, maybe you hit it, it's nothing to worry about. So I was like, oh, okay, whatever. So I kind of just shrugged it off, and I remember at school that day, people were like, that's kind of strange, why is your hand so big? And I was like, I don't know, because as the day progressed, it just got bigger and bigger. And I found it kind of strange, but I didn't go to the doctors about it or anything. The next month it happened again, and I knew I hadn't hit my hand. I knew I hadn't eaten anything different, and so my mom kind of thought it was strange as well. And at the same time, I actually got really sick. I started vomiting uncontrollably, and so we're like, okay, we're gonna go to the doctors. So we showed the doctor, and the doctor was like, well, your stomach and your hand don't really have anything in common. I don't think they have anything to do with each other, but I'll get you an allergy test. So we got some allergy testing done, and it was discovered that I was allergic to peanuts, and we had never known that before. And he was like, well, maybe you're just eating peanuts. And to be completely honest, I hated peanuts and peanut butter, so there was just no way that I was consuming it, but maybe it was around me. But it just didn't make sense that my hands were getting big, because that's not how an allergic reaction kind of develops. So I wasn't getting rashes, I wasn't getting itchy, I had no runny nose, runny eyes, and so I got my EpiPens, and we just kind of moved along. And then every month after that, I would just get really sick, and one of my hands would swell up. It just alternated all the time, and I just have so many pictures of my hands just being extremely swollen. It continued all throughout the rest of high school. I never really thought too much of it. I just thought that maybe I just had this weird hand thing. I went off to university, and I remember when I first went off, I warned my roommates, I think there's something wrong with me. I'm sick. Just warning you now, you're gonna see stuff happen. And believe it or not, the first week that I lived with them, one of my roommates had to take me to the hospital because I was just so sick. I couldn't move. I couldn't get myself off the floor. She had to stay in the hospital with me. She stayed one night with me. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days after that, and they were talking about removing my appendix and my gallbladder because they weren't really sure what was wrong. And but they also weren't sure that if they removed my appendix and my gallbladder that it would make everything better again. So in the end, they didn't remove anything, but they realized my hand was swollen, and because my hand was swollen, the nurses thought that was strange, and they wanted to get me this specialist. So they assigned me this specialist, who I saw a couple of times in first year. He did a lot of testing on me. He tested me for blood clots, he tested me for bone cancer, he tested me for arthritis, he tested me for a bunch of things. And in the end, all my tests came back inconclusive or negative, so he realized that he didn't know how to treat me, he didn't know what was wrong with me, and he basically told me he couldn't help me. And I was pretty devastated because I was in first year. I thought I was sick, and then around Christmas time when we were having exams, my hand swelled up so big I couldn't hold a pencil. It was my left hand, I'm left-handed, and I was so stressed out. I thought I was sick, so I remember I had to email all my teachers, had to get all my exams deferred, and it was really sad for me because it was my first set of exams in university, and I couldn't even write them. So first year kind of continued along like that, and I tried to get with the disability services at the school, but because the doctor couldn't diagnose with me with what I had, I couldn't be on any services with the school. So if it happened again, I I just had to come up with something the day of, which really sucked, and it kind of remained that way throughout university. As I went through second year, I just got sicker and sicker. I would be sicker for hours. I wouldn't take myself to the hospital unless I was sick for more than 15 hours, or I had a really big exam the next day and had to try and really make my hand go down. Everything that I was given in the hospital never really made any swelling go down or made me feel any better. So it wasn't like going to the hospital was all that beneficial for me, but I still went anyway. And near the end of the second year, I was kind of like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to the hospital because there's nothing they can do to help me, and nothing really makes me feel better when I go there. So I completely stopped going to the hospital throughout third year. I just dealt with my swollen hands. I remember just crying about them a lot, just like asking myself, why me? It was just, yeah, it was a really sad period. And I think that led me down a downward spiral. At the end of third year, throughout that summer, I started working again as a server, and I started getting sicker, like when I started eating out more. I went on vacation at the end of that summer, so the end of 2016, I went on vacation, and we went to Cuba, and usually when I get on a plane, a body part swells. So as we took off, my hand were swollen. So we landed and I had a swollen hand. About 2 days in, I kind of fell hard down on my foot. So my foot swole up. And about a day after that, I got so sick. They thought I got food poisoning. And after about 15 hours of being sick, because I just did not want to go to a hospital in Cuba, I ended up having to call myself an ambulance and going to a hospital in Cuba, not once, but 2 days in a row because I was that sick. And they couldn't figure out what was going on with me. I was tested for so many different things, and they were great to me. It was fabulous healthcare, I can tell you that. But I was so sick, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I eventually did start feeling better after 2 days in the hospital, and was able to enjoy like the last 2 days of my vacation. But when I came back, I just started getting sick all the time, which is really strange. And then I developed this cough in like October, and I kid you not, I did not get rid of it during my fourth year university. I had it the entire year, and it was just this annoying, obnoxious cough that I could not get rid of. And I developed this sinus infection that I also couldn't get rid of. I started going to the hospital again because I didn't want to be missing class anymore. I wanted to always be there, and so I always needed a doctor's note, and I didn't have a doctor's to go to, so I always had to go to the hospital to get this doctor's note. And I would be in the hospital till maybe like 4 or 6 a.m. trying to get my swollen hands to go down so I could write an exam, get a note, and still be in class for 8 a.m. Like, I was always in the hospital, then going to class. Like, I didn't really give myself a break with that. I think about March of 2017, I was like, okay, well, I need to give myself a break. Like, dude, I can't keep going to class if I'm sick because it's just making me worse. And about mid-March, it was a Monday, my cough was getting so bad that it was making it kind of hard to breathe. And I remember just sitting around the table with my roommate one day and her friends, and someone made me laugh, and I honestly could not catch my breath after it. Like, I just kind of choked. So I remember going down to my room and trying to keep my cool because I had class at 6:30. It was a late class, and I was trying to go to class, and I just could not breathe for the life of me. And I remember going outside, waiting for the bus to go to school, and I was just standing there crying because I was in so much pain that I just could not breathe in and out. And I took the bus, got all the way to the school, ran to the cafeteria, found someone with a car, and I was like, you need to take me to the emergency room, I cannot breathe. And she was like, okay. So she took me to the emergency room. I remember just walking in there saying I couldn't breathe. I had MRIs, X-rays, they had me on painkillers, they had me on steroids, and eventually I started feeling better. And then the doctor came in and he said, I thought you had a collapsed lung, but we can't see anything, so we're just really not sure what's wrong. And that was just another, we don't know what's wrong. So I was like, okay, whatever, just give me the painkillers and I'll go. Because I had a cheerleading competition that weekend, and if I had the painkillers, if it happened again, at least I had something to make it feel better. And just a couple days later, I woke up and I honestly swore I had strep throat. Like, my throat was killing me. Like, but I didn't have, my throat wasn't killing me the day before. So it was strange that it came up so fast, but it was just killing me. And I remember making myself a tea, trying to drink it, and I couldn't. Like, it was just getting stuck in my throat. Like, it was not going down at all. And I'm like, okay, this is strange. So I went and looked at myself in the mirror, and then I saw basically 2 large lumps just coming out of my neck. And I realized that, well, at first I thought they were my tonsils, and then I realized that they were my lymph nodes. So I started freaking out. And I went and looked at my makeup mirror and basically saw that my uvula was taking up the entire space of my mouth. Like, there was no air getting past it, basically. So I made myself a doctor's appointment immediately, but I should have taken myself to the hospital immediately. And went to the doctors. The first doctor kind of looked at me like I had 3 heads. He was like, this looks so serious. Like, I can't prescribe you antibiotics. So we kind of left the room, and he was on the phone, and he came back in. And he's like, there's an ears, nose, and throat specialist downstairs. He's ready to see you. He's done for the day. So just go down there and speak to him. And I was like, okay. So I go downstairs, and I had an ears, nose, throat specialist back home. So I had a lot of experience with that kind of thing. And I told him about that. And so he realized, oh, so, you've been sick. And so he starts to look down my throat, and he's like, well, it's a good thing you brought yourself into the doctor's office today because you look really sick. And I was like, yeah. And so he's like, I can't see down your throat at all. So I have to do this scope. So he takes like this scope and like puts it like up my nose, down my throat. And he's like looking, showing me all his bacteria. And he's like asking me to speak because he was looking at my vocal cords. And he takes it out and he's like, you're really sick. You need to go to the hospital right now. And I was shocked, and I was like, for how long? I have a cheerleading competition on Friday, and we were supposed to be going to Montreal, and he just looked at me and he's like, you're not going to Montreal. And I think at that point I just started crying, and he left the room. He was already calling the critical care unit at the hospital and was like, is there a bed? I have a patient coming in right now. And I called my roommate, and I was like, I need a ride. I need to go back a big. I need to go to the hospital. And she was like kind of freaking out. And so I get to the hospital, and I was hooked up to IVs immediately. And he comes in, we have to do the scope again to show the nurses. And so he shows the nurses, and then I found out they were OR nurses, so the operating room nurses. And about 15 minutes later, like 45 minutes of being there, but 15 minutes after he had checked me again, he's like, you're going in the OR, we need to put a breathing tube down right now. And I was freaking out, like nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And so I think I was like crying, and like the nurses were holding me, and they brought me into the OR and they sedated me, and I had a breathing tube in me, and they thought that the breathing tube would only be in for like 24 to 48 hours when it actually had to stay in for 4 days. On the 5th day they took it out, and it all went by like a blur. Like, I could not tell you what I was doing in those 4 days. I didn't even know my mom was with me for those 4 days. My first day back at school was the last day of school, and I was completely unprepared for all of my exams. I had to go back, write some midterms. I was so stressed out. I can't even put myself back in that place. Like, that was the most stressful period I've ever been through. And I remember always thinking that my throat was gonna swell again. Like, I was just so scared because I didn't understand why this had just happened. I didn't understand why my airways were closing. I didn't understand why I almost just died and was put on life support. It didn't make any sense to me. And about a month after that, speaking to a couple people who were talking about this autoimmune disease called hereditary angioedema, or C1 esterase deficiency. And I was like, oh, what's that? And so I remember Googling it, and the first time I Googled it, I remember just sitting there and bawling my eyes out. Like, it was just all my symptoms, all my experiences just written out. I'd never come across it before, and just to see the words of rare disease and the statistics, I was just so shocked. I never thought that I could have anything rare because I'd lived so long with people telling me there was nothing wrong with me. So it completely shocked me. And then I was assigned to the specialist who had no question about my diagnosis. I got my blood tested. It came back positive, and I was through into this world of rare diseases. So yeah, that's my story. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe.